record. Good morning, dearest friends. Thank you for joining us for a short power Talmud session, Sunday, January 9th, the 7th of Shvat. Yeah, we're already like deep into the winter. I'm dealing with I'm in a lot of denial. I'm like still waiting for Hanukkah to come. But
I know what you mean.
No, because Hanukkah was early, so it's like, December and January without Hanukkah. Anyways, we're dedicating, because we have a short time, let's dedicate our learning for the good health, good circumstances of all the holy names in our post, and for all the members of the Chabur and all of Klal Yisrael. We are closing out our previous Agadic conversation, a discussion about, well, first the Mekoshesh, the gatherer of the wood in the desert, who he was, what his crime was. That's, of course, right? I don't like the word crime, what his sin was, which malacha, and that, of course, connects to our Gemara, which is about Shabbos. We then talked about Aaron and Miriam, and they're speaking about Moshe. Of course, we know, according to our tradition, they did it with the most sincere of intentions, but it becomes a teachable moment about the power of Lashon Hara and the consequences. And so we have Rabbi Akiva adding that not only Miriam had saras, but Aaron also did, and we discussed the grades of severity of the behavior of Aaron and Miriam, who initiated the conversation, etc., etc. We went on to say, Achosha Dechsherim, person suspects a person that is innocent, there are consequences, and it was brought in the context of Moshe not having faith in the Jewish people, and ultimately Hashem tells him that he becomes mitzoras kesheleg, he has saras, very short while, connected to that suspicion. And then we have one liner that comes in isolation, but maybe we'll spend a moment to understand it. The Gemara already spoke of Moshe's miracle, the miracle of the tsaras. Although the Gemara is framing it as a negative, it was to have tsaras, to have some kind of skin malady that has also a spiritual message. It's not positive even for a moment. And of course, granted, it's introduced because Miriam too had tsaras, possibly Aaron. But we now go on to the other miracle, or one of the other miracles, the miracle of the snake, or the staff rather, turning into a snake. This is all Minyanei Yoma. These are the matters that we discussed these last few parshas. Of course, this week we start the Shalach, so we're already on to the next stage of the story. But here, the Torah, the Gemara, quotes a pasuk from Parshas Va'era, right? I believe. Vayivla mate Aaron et matotam. Aaron's staff swallowed up et matosam, their staffs. So how do you understand this pasuk? So I suppose one could understand the pasuk to say that Aaron's staff, that is now disguised as a snake, swallowed the other staffs that were disguised as snakes, right? Because what happened is they threw their staffs on the ground, they turned into snakes, and Aaron's snake swallowed the others. But ultimately, the Gemara shares with us a take that Amar Rabbi Elazar, Neis, V'soich Neis. This was a miracle within a miracle. Probably we might call it a double miracle. So what is the baseline miracle? Any thoughts? What's the baseline miracle of Aaron's snake swallowing the other snakes?
It became a snake.
So generally speaking, I'm not sure. Dr. Hammer, you were saying something?
That this staff became a snake.
Again, my sound is acting up.
Maybe I'm not muted, so maybe you
No, it was my sound. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said the first thing was that his staff became a snake.
Oh,
that's the first miracle, I guess.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. I wasn't necessarily familiar, but I think you're right. That a staff should turn into a snake, that is an incredible miracle. How do I know it's a miracle? Well, frankly, none of us, to my knowledge, could do it. It's not something that, commonly occurs. It's a miracle. And then the fact that his staff swallows the other staffs, his snake swallows the other staffs, is a miracle, because do snakes swallow snakes? Well, I think snakes do swallow, but could snakes swallow multiple snakes? But Doctor, ultimately, I think you're correct. Our Gemara seems to be saying
the miracle was that the bigger miracle was that it did it while it was still a staff.
Okay. So I believe where the Gemara is getting at, and Rashi will say this, is that Aaron's staff swallowed the snakes while being a staff. Now, staffs don't swallow snakes. That's what Rashi says. Once Moshe or Aaron's staff resumed its original status as a staff, Bala'an, it swallowed up the other snakes. The Lokishahu Tanin, not while it was a serpent. The Lochti Vayivla Tanin Aaron. So, although this isn't connected on the conceptual level of suspicion and guilt or crime or whatever, but it connects, or the Gemara is giving us this added perspective. Why does the Torah say Vayivla Mata Aaron? Because it did the act of swallowing while it was actually a staff. Mark, what do you say? Did Aaron's staff swallow up other staffs, or did it swallow other snakes?
That we're not sure, but I think it might have been either way. But staff swallowing snakes or staffs is still pretty.
You're
pretty
saying
miraculous.
once the staff opens its mouth, that's already a miracle.
Yeah.
Okay,
Whether it's swallowing staffs or snakes, they probably doesn't make much
but it's
difference.
interesting because once we use the diuk of the pasuk, you'd have to go the whole way and say Mata Aaron Matotam. It was a staff, which is not how we typically envision the story. You know, if you learn it in Hebrew school, or even if you read it in a parsha discussion or a parsha class, or you read it in the Chumash, without, let's say, I think the Stone Chumash in the comment, I'm pretty sure they bring it in the bottom, but it's not like how you'd read it usually. So it's a big chiddush. So I was debating if we should jump into the next Gemara or spend a little more time doing this, but I think I want to spend a little more time on this because it's interesting and it's part of the Chumash and it's an essential part of our story. And also, well, Pesach's not that close, but it's going to be something that's going to be on our radar eventually, and we'll have something else to add to our Pesach discussion. So, Dr. Hammer, we asked Nes B'Soich Nes, and your interpretation was a double Nes. For a staff to turn into a snake is a miracle. Then, for the act of swallowing or whatever, that's a double miracle. The Maharsha is quoted, but he's not attached. He's not citing it.
The biggest miracle here is the ability of a staff to do something that staffs don't usually do. We know that later the iron staffs will bloom, which is also a miracle, but this is not such great a miracle because other plants bloom and stuff might bloom if it became invigorated. But to be able to swallow anything, including other stuffs, there should be some anatomical features that should be supplied to the stuff, which is probably the biggest miracle in this.
And so, Professor, you're actually weighing in, if I understand correctly, something of the debate that I wanted to just show you now between the Maharsha and the Ben Yada. The Maharsha makes a comment that what is the double miracle? Miracle A, that a snake would swallow other snakes. Miracle B, that a staff would swallow other snakes. Other commentaries say that no, for a snake to swallow another snake is anatomically plausible. You've ever seen a snake? They have Hashem miraculous in the wondrous way that He engineers the world. Snakes have the ability to open their jaws beyond what we would imagine, and they can swallow a rabbit. And you even see that big lump, and it takes a long time for the snake to digest it. And so, I know that's not really, Professor, what you were saying. You were talking more about the miracle of the staff to have the anatomical capacity of swallowing, but you reminded me of what's going on. So the Maharsha says that Rashi says that the miracle A is snake swallow snake, miracle B, staff swallow snake. But the Maharsha says no. It's pretty evident from the Medrashim that precede this conversation. The miracle is exclusively that it was a staff. And so what is miracle A? Oh, so Maharsha says, you know what the miracle A is? That the staff swallowed the other staff. Because a snake swallowing a snake's not a miracle. Miracle B, and Professor, I think you were mechaven closer to the words of the Maharsha. The second miracle is that the staff, although it consumed however that looked like the other snakes, it didn't have that telltale bulge that snakes usually have. Aaron's staff didn't become a barrel, right? Imagine you swallow a whole bunch of staffs, it will become a very large staff. And so the Maharsha says miracle number 2 is that there was no change in the appearance of the staff. So the other snakes were swallowed up by the staff, or the other staffs were swallowed, and you would never see there was no difference in the appearance of Aaron's staff. Now let's see the Ben Yoyada. So he says, I in Maharsha, he says, check out the Maharsha's comment, which it's for some reason it's not connected in the Sefaria. I was able to read it, but the text is so small. I just paraphrased it for you. The Maharsha asks what exactly the nature of the double miracle was. And Dr. Hammer, for some reason, I don't know why, they all seem to reject your interpretation, which I think is a simple interpretation, which is the snake, the staff turning into a snake, and then the swallowing. It's 2 stories. For some reason, they don't embrace it. I'm not sure why.
I guess they don't like a Pashut explanation from a Pashut.
A Levi, a Talmud Chacham, a Pashut. I don't know if that goes in the same breath. All right, so Umasha Pirish Maharsha Adifa Adayin Lo Nitras Dikta Kaniskar. So the Maharsha says the staff didn't become fat, and the Ben Yoda says we're still missing something. Kinei Sabliya Hischil Haris Tekif Betchila Sabliya. Swallowing, the miracle was the moment of the swallowing. The miracle of the fatness of the staff, that only follows the swallowing. So we still need to ask, what was the nes b'toch nes? So he says, Ingin beis nisim Elohim. This is what the 2 miracles are. Number 1, that a staff has the capacity to swallow. Professor, they keep on getting closer and closer to your comments. Number 1, staffs don't swallow. Number 2, most swallowing critters can only eat 1 item at a time. Here, somehow miraculously, they all were swallowed in 1 shot. And so in the same moment that the miracle of the capacity to swallow was triggered, at that very moment, all of the staffs were being swallowed. And that's how he interprets, the Ben Yoyada interprets Nes B'Soch Nes. That there was literally in the same moment 2 different miraculous facets to the same event. Number 1, swallowing is pretty unexpected. Number 2, swallowing all of them at the same time, that's utterly unexpected. And then he says, interesting. Nun. Okay, this is gematria, that's beyond me. So that is the 2 interpretations, or the 3 interpretations. Dr. Hammer, I still, until this Gemara, always understood it the way you explained it. And so I'm going to...
I have a question.
Sure.
In other words, if this were a magician in Las Vegas on stage, piff, all of a sudden they disappear. Even if he took his cane or staff or magic wand, we wouldn't say that wand swallowed.
Right.
We would say made them disappear. There's no description here of swallowing. Is there a mouth? Is there the bottom of the staff? Is it the side? There's no bulge. There's no. I mean, so why do we say swallowed? What is?
So the Chumash portrays. Oh, okay. The Chumash portrays the story that there was an act of swallowing, and we're wondering, so you're saying the act of swallowing all of them in the same moment seems to diminish seems to make it less of an act of swallowing and more an act of the wondrous disappearing act of the staffs. So I hear your question. What I'm forced to consider, to imagine, is that ultimately there was the visualization of all of the snakes being swallowed into the single staff. You're saying maybe it I don't know, caused them to dissipate, or whatever exactly it looked like.
Does it say that people saw the swallowing, or that poof,
It doesn't say either, but the words that it uses are specifically vayivla, and it's swallowed. Here's the full verse. Vayashlicho ish mateyu. Each man cast his staff down. Vayiyu letaninim. They all turned into taninim, serpents. Vayivla mate Aaron et matotam. And Aaron's staff swallowed. Vayivla. And so the word vayivla indicates that there was some kind of actual swallowing. But I hear your question. Why are we compelled to use, why does the Chumash use the description of livloa, to swallow, particularly based on our Gemaras? Was it in the Gemara? No, particularly according to the interpretation that we read of the commentary, that it was swallowed all in one moment. If you say it was swallowed all in one moment, Dr. Hammer, you're saying there might have been a better way to express that action than swallowing.
Probably consumed would be better.
Consumed, or was swallowed even by the earth. They put down their staffs. They put them down on the ground.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's possible swallow could in Hebrew be, I believe, a synonym with consume. So so I guess our question becomes now, did the staff develop a mouth? Did it have like a serpent's mouth, but the rest of it was a staff? Or did it just consume? That's a question that unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to leave. We're gonna have to be left with a little curiosity. Unfortunately, there was no footage of the event.
No videotape.
No videotapes, or at least it was deleted. The tape is missing. So
In that 18-minute gap.
the missing minutes. But
it goes to show you that everything we see and touch is alive, because it could always be activated by Hashem.
Yeah.
He moved the mountains. He made the rock pour water.
Yeah. Let me confuse. I do need to go in a minute, but let me just confuse everyone. There are differences in Jewish scholarship about how to understand what exactly the magicians did. Did they actually do the action, or was it just a sleight of hand? So the Rabbeinu Bechaya, who's one of the great commentaries, says it doesn't say vayu taninim, they were actually snakes. Elalit taninim, they became like serpents. The wizards couldn't actually cause the staffs to turn into snakes. They had the ability to make the appearance. They knew how to create an image. They knew how to create, what do you call it? You know what I'm talking about? A
Hologram, but I don't know if
a hologram of sorts, but they couldn't actually turn their staffs into snakes. And without going further, this pshat needs some assistance to figure out how to synthesize that with what we're saying that Aaron's staff swallowed it. Did Aaron's staff actually swallow it, or did Aaron's staff appear to swallow it? Did they shut off the hologram, but the staffs are gone? And so I think we have to leave it with some ambiguity. But what I would say, and I'm sorry to close this conversation short, I think this would be a fascinating conversation to lead at the Seder with your grandkids or family, to try to imagine what exactly this really might have looked like. I have to leave. I'm going to leave the link on because I don't want to. So, Mark, you're going to be the admin, and I'm sorry again to jump off short. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow for a full length session.